Tyrion Lannister spent 2 seasons as Hand of the Queen, and in that time he was wrong about his sister 4 separate times. Every one of those errors cost Daenerys Targaryen something she could not replace. Not one of them cost Cersei Lannister anything at all. The usual explanation is that the writer stopped bothering with him, and I understand why people reach for it, because the alternative is harder to say out loud. Lay his plans out in the order he made them, and they stop looking random. They fail in a direction. Every major strategy Tyrion personally authored as Hand of the Queen ended the same way. Daenerys poorer than she started. Cersei still standing behind the same walls. That is the claim I am putting in front of you, and I want to be exact about how far it goes, because this argument breaks if you push it one step too far. The first case is also the cleanest. At Dragonstone, Tyrion designs the entire war. No dragons over King's Landing. Westerosi armies will lay the siege, so the realm watches Daenerys liberate the capital instead of burning it. Yara Greyjoy's ships will carry the Dornish party home to raise their army. The Unsullied will sail west and take Casterly Rock, the Lannister seat, the symbol of the house Daenerys crossed the world to break. Within days of that plan going into motion, Euron Greyjoy destroys the fleet at sea and takes the Dornish prisoner. The Unsullied walk into a castle that is almost empty and find themselves stranded on the wrong coast. Jaime Lannister marches the Lannister army in the opposite direction and takes Highgarden. The Tyrell gold reaches King's Landing ahead of Daenerys, and Cersei uses it to settle her debt with the Iron Bank. Before the rest of the ledger, the counting method, because a video with the word every in the title owes you one. A plan qualifies only if Tyrion authored it, argued for it in a room where someone else wanted something different, and it is already a decision the audience argues about. Battles he did not design are out, along with orders Daenerys gave over his objection. Anything before he takes the pin is out. That leaves 5. There is a test worth running on that first plan. Ask what a competent version of it would have looked like, then measure the distance. This is the same man who held King's Landing against Stannis Baratheon with wildfire and a sortie he led himself, so the standard is not low. Daenerys arrived in Westeros with the largest army on the continent, the only fleet that mattered until Euron rebuilt one, and 3 grown dragons, against an enemy holding a half-burnt capital, an empty treasury, and no allies. That gap was enormous, and it was temporary, because Cersei's only route to survival ran through buying time and buying soldiers. Tyrion's plan handed her both. It split Daenerys' forces across 2 seas. It sent her infantry to a rock of no strategic value while her ships sat exposed. And it left the richest treasury in Westeros undefended long enough for Jaime to walk it home. Honest label for Case 1. Tactical win, strategic collapse. The castle was taken and the war was lost in the same week. The question I just asked of that plan is one of 5 I use on every scene. They are collected in the quiet game with the rest of the method, linked below. The second case is the wight hunt, and I have to correct myself here. When I first built this ledger, I had the wight hunt at the top of it, because on paper, it is the most expensive thing Tyrion ever suggested. It costs Daenerys a dragon, and the dragon it costs her is the one the Night King raises and rides through the wall. If you are looking for a single decision that hands Cersei an advantage, losing a third of Daenerys' air power for a corpse in a box looks unbeatable. I was wrong to rank it first. The wall coming down did not make Cersei safer. It put her in the same grave as everyone else, and the army that came through it would not have stopped to check her surname. So the wight hunt goes near the bottom of this ledger rather than the top. It cost Daenerys enormously. It did not protect Cersei, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to keep the count tidy. What it does establish is the shape of Tyrion's reasoning. The entire premise of that mission is that Cersei Lannister can be persuaded, that shown sufficient proof, she will act in the interest of something larger than herself. Tyrion is the man in the room advancing that premise, and nobody alive has more evidence against it than he does. The third case is the Dragonpit, and it is the one scene in this story where the show closed the door on us. The summit fails. Cersei walks out. Tyrion follows her, alone, into her chambers, past the mountain, to speak privately with a sister who has publicly offered a lordship to anyone who brings her his head. We do not hear it. The camera does not go in with him. We see him enter, and then we see him leave. And between those two shots, the plot of the remaining season is decided. What we get is the result. Tyrion comes out. Cersei follows shortly after, and announces that Lannister forces will march north. Tyrion believes her, argues for her, and stakes what is left of his credibility on her. She is lying, and she has already sent Euron across the narrow sea for the Golden Company with Highgarden's gold. Daenerys takes her armies and her dragons north to fight the dead, and Cersei spends that entire war unmolested, resupplied, and reinforced. Honest label for Case 3. The most consequential conversation of the last 2 seasons. Contents unknown, outcome entirely in Cersei's favor. The show itself puts the consequence on the record. When Jaime arrives at Winterfell alone, and the Northern Lords learn that no Lannister army is coming, Daenerys tells Tyrion to his face that he was wrong about his sister, and Sansa Stark tells him she once thought he was the cleverest man alive. That is the closest this story ever comes to auditing him, and the audit stops there. Nobody follows the obvious next question, which is why a man of Tyrion's ability keeps being wrong about one particular person, and why the errors never once run the other way. There is a reading of the Dragonpit where Tyrion is simply gullible, and it is a legitimate one. There is another where he saw the pregnancy and made a private calculation about the only nephew he had left. There is a third where something was traded in that room, and neither party ever named it afterwards. All 3 fit what we are shown, and that is the problem. Because a story that wanted us certain would have let us listen. This is a series that has shown us conspiracies in wine cellars, in brothels, in the black cells, and in the crypts beneath Winterfell. When Tyrion goes to Cersei alone, we are left outside with the mountain. The limit of this entire argument sits in that corridor. I can show you what each of these 5 plans did. I cannot show you what Tyrion meant by them. Effect is visible in this story. Intent, in his case specifically, was kept off camera. Once, at the exact moment it mattered most. The strongest objection to everything I have said belongs here rather than at the end, because it is serious and it never goes away. The first move Tyrion ever made in this story was to join Daenerys Targaryen. Voluntarily, across the world, at real risk to himself, he attached himself to the one force in existence capable of ending his sister and her reign. And then he handed that force a strategy and a road into Westeros. A man protecting Cersei Lannister does not begin by giving her enemy 3 dragons. Anyone arguing that Tyrion planned this from Meereen has to explain that away, and I do not believe it can be explained away. Whatever this pattern is, it did not begin as a plan. The 4th case is shorter and colder. Euron has ambushed the fleet. Rhaegal has been shot out of the sky. Missandei has been taken alive and is being held on the battlements. Daenerys arrives at the gates of King's Landing with what is left of her army, every siege engine she owns, and every reason to end it that afternoon. Tyrion asks for one more attempt. He rides forward, appeals to Cersei directly, and when that fails, he appeals over her, to the soldiers on the wall and the people behind them, invoking the child she is carrying. Cersei's answer is to have Missandei's head removed in front of everyone. That delay did not win Cersei anything on a map, and if you are counting territory, it looks like nothing at all. Count time instead, because time was the only currency she had left. It bought her one more day behind her own walls at the exact moment the army outside had run out of patience. It let her choose the ground and the terms of the demonstration she was about to make. And it cost Daenerys, the last person alive who spoke to her as something other than a subject or an advisor, at the precise point when her restraint was the only thing standing between that city and its ashes. Cersei ended that afternoon safer than she began it. Daenerys ended it alone. Honest label for Case 4. A temporary escape for Cersei, paid for with something Daenerys could never recover. The fifth case is the strongest item in the ledger, and it is strongest because Tyrion states it out loud. Before the final assault, he goes to Daenerys and secures a specific concession. If the bells ring, the attack stops. Consider what that is. In 2 seasons of losing every strategic argument he ever made, this is the one condition he successfully attaches to a battle, and this is what he spends it on. He then commits treason to guarantee it, releasing Jaime Lannister from custody and directing him through the tunnels beneath the Red Keep, so that Jaime can reach Cersei, get her to ring those bells, and put her on a ship out of the city. Tyrion has engineered a scenario in which the woman responsible for the war walks out of it alive, and the mechanism of her escape is a signal he personally negotiated with the queen he serves. He is arrested for it afterwards, and he does not deny a word of it. Honest label for Case 5. The plan worked exactly as designed, right up until Daenerys ignored the bells and Cersei died anyway. 5 cases, 1 of them neutral, and 4 in which Daenerys finished poorer and Cersei finished safer, measured in days, in gold, in soldiers, or in a rout out of the city. That is the ledger, and now comes the part where I try to break it, because a pattern that has never been argued against is not evidence, it is a coincidence held with confidence. 1 objection has already been heard. 2 remain. The first is the one about the writers, and it deserves an answer rather than a dismissal. 2 shortened seasons needed Cersei alive until the penultimate episode, and Tyrion was the most convenient break available. Under that explanation, the pattern is real but authorial, a byproduct of plotting rather than a property of the man. I cannot rule it out, and neither can anyone else, because it lives outside the text. What I would say is that the pattern in the finished story is still there to be read, and reading it does not require me to prove what anyone in a writer's room was thinking. The second objection runs deeper. Every one of these plans had defensible logic at the moment it was made. Refusing to burn a city full of civilians is a reasonable position for a hand to hold. Proving the existence of the dead to a hostile queen is reasonable in principle. Sparing a surrendered city is not a betrayal. It is the law of war. All of that is true, and it is precisely why this argument cannot travel further than it does, because a decision with a good, stated reason and a bad, consistent result is the kind of evidence that fits more than one explanation. And one item in the record cuts against the pattern outright, so it goes in. When Varys turned against Daenerys, he was working to replace her with Jon Snow, and a living Varys conspiracy was arguably the best remaining chance of stopping the assault on King's Landing before it began. Tyrion told Daenerys. He burned the only other person in her camp who was actively trying to prevent the thing that eventually killed Cersei. That is not the behavior of a man running a quiet operation on his family's behalf, and no honest version of this ledger can leave it out. So what is left? The pattern survives because none of those objections touch the outcomes, and the outcomes are the claim. What does not survive is the word betrayal. Betrayal requires that he knew, and knowing is the one thing this story kept off-screen, deliberately, in a room in the Dragonpit. So this is the answer, and it is heavier than treachery would have been. Tyrion's intelligence never left him. His impartiality did, and it failed in one direction only. He was, throughout those 2 seasons, the only member of Daenerys' council whose family occupied the target. And there is no scene anywhere in this show where anyone puts that to him. Varys is asked repeatedly where his loyalty lies. Jorah is exiled twice over an old betrayal. Jon is interrogated about a claim he never wanted. Tyrion Lannister advises a war against House Lannister for 2 full seasons, plans the campaigns, sits at the table, and the conflict of interest is never once named aloud. Not by Daenerys, and not by Tyrion himself. That is what this ledger is actually evidence of. A man with a real conflict, given real power, whose judgment stayed sharp everywhere it was not required to be, and dulled precisely where his sister stood. Whether he ever admitted that to himself is a question the show refuses to answer, and I would rather leave it open than close it badly. There is a final detail that makes this harder rather than easier. Of everyone who sat at that council table, Varys is executed. Jorah dies in the snow. Missandei is beheaded on a wall. Grey Worm sails away with nothing. And Daenerys is killed by the man Tyrion wrote to Winterfell to summon. Tyrion is tried, and then he is promoted. He ends the story as Hand of the King, in the same chair, wearing the same pin, advising a ruler chosen by a council he talked into existence. The worst strategist of the war is the only member of the War Council to finish it with more power than he started. He also finishes it with no family left. And that is where the sentimental reading and the calculating reading collapse into the same tragedy. Everything that fell in Cersei's favor still ended with Cersei dead under a collapsing keep, with Jaime beside her, both killed by the queen Tyrion brought to Westeros. If he was protecting them, he failed. If he only loved them badly, he still failed. The ledger reads the same either way. So I will not leave you with the question of whether Tyrion Lannister betrayed Daenerys Targaryen, because the evidence does not reach that far, and I am not going to pretend it does. The question is smaller and sharper. In a series that let us listen to conspirators in cellars and black cells and crypts, what was said in the one room the camera would not enter, when the Hand of the Queen walked in alone to see his sister, and walked out arguing her case?